Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Novi, student ID number K4518027, Class B, Natural Science Education. I want to present the results of my article review entitled Comic as a Narrative in Natural Science Education. First, article identity. Title: Comics as a Narrative in Natural Science Education. Author by Agnaldo Arroyo. Year in 2011. The journal is Western Anatolia Journal of Educational Science, or WEJS. The page from 93 to 98. The ESSN is 1308891. The second is article review. 1. Introduction. Some students still have problems understanding the concept of science. One of them is the problem of knowing something, but when they have to use it, they cannot. For example, students can solve problems in science class, but in the real world or outside of school, they fail or cannot face the situation. Natural science education has an important role in broadening students' horizon because natural science always discusses real and concrete things and phenomena that are part of students' realities and even everyday life. Science education must be able to make science more relevant to students and can reflect the actual practice of science. As for students, they need to develop skills in dealing with controversial issues of society in the real world. Therefore, natural science teachers agree with the statement that real-life context is important when teaching science literacy. Contextual learning can be used as a science learning approach because this approach is related to students' understanding related to real life, so that students can more easily understand natural science material. Learning media is needed. One of the learning media that supports students to understand science material easily is comics. Comic as a narrative in natural science education related to scientific content. Comics are graphic media that contain integrated words and image where the image not only describes the story, but also convey expression through arrangement to construct a sequential narrative. The narrative describes the desire created by the creator, that the reader and listener to know what happened. With comic as a natural science learning media, students will be more interested and can actively participate by using their imaginations to understand the pictures. 2. Methodology. This study analyzed several comics produced by elementary natural science teachers to understand the potential of comics as narrative in natural science education. The natural science teacher in pairs prepare narrative stories to make the comic on the computer. The comics are made with character orientation, word balance, graphic designs, comic language, and captions to help understand the narrative story. And the data collection was carried out by audio recording the teacher's speech during this activity, and then transcribed and the comics produced were analyzed. 3. Findings and discussions. The findings of this study state that narrative can be used to support the public with several elements that provide interactive experience for them. The comic as a narrative is able to communicate natural science problems to the public. Most of the comics that are produced are related to the experience of environmental issues, where it is possible for comics to deduce meaning and understand message simply by watching, reading, and interpreting images that help understanding the story. This method is believed by the teacher that comics can generate interest and can be worked on scientific topics because it becomes an action that shows students another way to dialogue about reality. However, students' interest depends on how the teacher teaches them. For example, for the early grades, such as elementary school, it is more important to start with a comic based on the narrative in a picture to tell a story. The next is comparison of Figure 1 and Figure 2. In Figure 1, the comic can tell a story through a series of short frames that convey something meaningful about water consumption. The text and image in this figure relate and work together to create the story. While in Figure 2, This narrative is less complex than Figure 1, which presents a more complex narrative. Figure 2 shows some important phrases, but there is no complete narrative, meaning there is no sequence in the understanding of Comic 2. Comic 2 is not suitable for communicating natural science because it does not convey scientific concept and does not have a narrative order, and making it confusing. So that Comic 2 can be said to waste the positive aspects of comics as a narrative to communicate natural science subjects. 5. Conclusion. It can be concluded that comics as a learning media can be used as a means of conveying scientific information. With the learning approach in natural science, comics can be used as a learning media. Teachers must be supported to be able to produce comics according to their real needs. And elementary school natural science teachers must be ready to manage comics with narrative production because there are some who are still experiencing difficulties. 6. Reviewer's point of view. The advantage of this journal are that the language is easy to learn, is not very scientific language, is presented concisely, and there are examples of good and bad comics to teach. While the disadvantages are that this journal doesn't describe the results of the transcriptions of the teacher when teaching with these comics. There is only comic analysis and there is no mention of the difficulties of elementary school teachers in making comics, but they are mentioned in the conclusion. In my opinion, I agree with the contents of the journal that the comic was an interesting learning media for use in learning natural science education, especially if the students are still in elementary school, because comic can convey stories with sequential narrative. That's all enough for me. Thanks for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.